This has been heavily requested for while now a compilation of some of the stories I've read through the years that genuinely freaked me out the first time I read them. I was out doing a delivery one late night. It was probably the longest drive I've ever taken for a pizza delivery. From the pizza place I used to work at, it was a 20-minute drive, which isn't too crazy out where I live, plus they ordered for large pies, so I figured it was a party and I'd get a much bigger tip. This has been heavily requested for while now a compilation of some of the stories I've read through the years that genuinely freaked me out the first time I read them. I was out doing a delivery one late night. It was probably the longest drive I've ever taken for a pizza delivery. From the pizza place I used to work at, it was a 20-minute drive, which isn't too crazy out where I live, plus they ordered for large pies, so I figured it was a party and I'd get a much bigger tip. Normally, get mad if we took back one pie, but I was afraid of what he would do if I brought back four. I was insanely unnerved, but I got out anyway and forced myself to the front door of the building. There was no doorbell, so I just knocked really hard. I heard nothing and didn't really expect to hear anything. I was extremely disappointed, not because nobody answered the door, but because I was realizing that it was all a waste of time and gas. I knocked one more time out of desperation. Then began to hear some kind of rustling noises from inside the building. I knocked again and yelled that I was the pizza guy. There was silence now. I felt a bit more uncomfortable now than before, but before I could turn around, I noticed something at the window. There was someone looking through the window. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. All I noticed were their eyes. Their eyes were open wider than I knew possible, staring intently at me. I was disturbed enough by this to drop the pizzas and run back to my car. The shitty thing wouldn't start until, turning the key for the third time, I drove off the grass and back onto the dirt road, but I felt the car rocking, about shaking and bumping. Something wasn't right. I didn't make it far from the building before I started hearing a sharp scraping sound coming from outside. There was so much resistance that I couldn't even drive. The car came to a stop. I got out of the car to check what the hell was wrong. A chill ran up my spine as I began to feel like my heart was constantly skipping beats. My tires had been slashed and had completely fallen off the rim, not just the front though. All four tires were slashed. I realized somebody did this when I was knocking on the door to that building. Instead of running, I got back in the car and locked the doors. I was so close to that building I could practically see it from where I was. If it weren't for the trees blocking the view, I called 911 and told everything to the operator. She told me the cops would be over as soon as possible and that I need to stay hidden. I asked her if it's advisable to stay in the car or run, and she told me it would be best to stay in the car with the door locked. She asked me to stay on the line with her until the cops would arrive. My whole body was shaking in all directions. There was nothing but dark, seemingly endless forest. I knew it would take forever for the cops to get there. I was not comfortable with sitting in that car so close to whoever did this. The next part is what utterly destroyed me. It still shakes me to this day, and I hope nobody ever has to experience this kind of fear. As I was scanning all the windows, making sure nobody was outside, I looked in the rearview mirror and there was the same person I saw at that window, eyes open wider than ever. I could see now that it was a woman, and I could ever so slightly see a smile begin to spread across her face. I opened my door and full-on sprinted into the woods, not caring how much noise I made. I ran until I was out of breath, which didn't take long, and I hid behind a giant log on the ground. I tried to cover my loud breathing with my hand as I waited and waited for what felt like hours until I finally heard sirens in the distance. I gathered up all the stamina I had left to run all the way back in the direction of the dirt road. Eventually the glowing red and blue lights came into view, and I had never felt better in my life. They were parked in front of my car, investigating with flashlights. I came out yelling at them like a lunatic to help me. I fell to the floor and started to gag, almost throwing up from running so much. They picked me up and began to ask me questions, to which I explained everything to the best of my ability. One of the two cars drove over to the building and the two officers began to search the building. They came back with nothing except for it's a little known common courtesy out in the mountains during a snowstorm that if someone's seeking shelter in your cabin, you let them in. No, I wasn't the one offering that courtesy to someone else in the story. I was the one seeking refuge. It was supposed to be a long weekend of hunting, but what started as a cold sunny day quickly formed tons of dark storm clouds, and I quickly found myself right In the middle of a blizzard, after a full rather unsuccessful day of hunting hares, I was. It's a little known common courtesy out in the mountains during a snowstorm that, if someone's seeking shelter in your cabin, you let them in know. I wasn't the one offering that courtesy to someone else in the story. I was the one seeking refuge. It was supposed to be a long weekend of hunting, but what started as a cold sunny day quickly formed tons of dark storm clouds, and I quickly found myself right in the middle of a blizzard, after a full rather unsuccessful day of hunting hares. I was way too far and disoriented to make my way back to my cabin. I had to seek refuge somewhere else. I came across a log cabin nestled between a circle of trees, no lights on, but I still had to try the door. I hit the door with my fist a few times, no answer, but I could hear footsteps on the other side approaching the door. Expected it to open, but it didn't. Shouted that I'm lost and need shelter. The door cracked open and I heard a voice say, "Come and leave your boots by the door." I waited a bit, expecting him to open the door fully and formally greet me as anyone would, but that didn't happen, so I pushed the door open myself and entered the dark cabin. The room was lit by 2 candles, just enough for me to see the couch that the man then told me to sleep on. As for the man, all he saw was his silhouette on the far side of the room. The little light from the candles didn't extend that far. I dropped my bag and gun on the floor and laid down on the couch. I thanked the man for letting me crash here till the storm blows over. He didn't answer. His behavior wasn't the most bizarre thing. Folks are strange up in the mountains. If he wasn't up for conversation, I'd just get some early shut-eye. I closed my eyes, though the level of darkness with my eyes closed wasn't much of a difference. I was subconsciously waiting to hear the man's footsteps leave the room, but they never did. I opened my eyes and his silhouette was still in the corner of the room, just standing there. I felt the need to say, "Yeah, I think I'm just going to get some sleep now, thanks." No response. I turned to my other side so that I wouldn't be tempted to just keep opening my eyes to check on him. Some time passed, but without having heard his footsteps walk away, the curiosity was eating away at me. I turned over to look again, and this time I swear to God the silhouette of the man was closer by at least a few feet. Couldn't make out his face, but the slight glow from the candles would just barely trickle around the man's forehead, and what I saw was disgustingly pale skin. I quickly gathered my belongings and thanked him, but I said I had to go. I didn't look at him anymore because I don't think I wanted to know what he looked like. I put my boots on outside and hurried back into the blizzard. I came across another cabin down the hill, this one with the light on. I knocked on the door and some old men and his wife answered the door. They welcomed me and immediately and were very inviting. They gave me some hot tea and offered me a spot on the couch. I told them my story about the freaky cabin up the hill, and the two looked at each other puzzled. The woman confirmed 2 times the cabin I was talking about. Then she said, "Honey, the owner of that cabin was murdered 2 years ago. That cabin has been vacant ever since." Think, oh my God, that's crazy. Why not just put your foot down and tell her to stop? Well, because you don't know my mom. It's very hard to describe her, but she's the kind of worrisome, innocent little lady that you just can't bring yourself to go against, and I hate to mention she also has mild dementia. Anyway, this was Saturday night, I think. It was around 2 in the morning. I was at a nearby club with a group of college friends, really the only place to hang out in this boring town, and I was getting ready to head home. I said goodbye to all my friends and walked the 3 blocks it took to get back to my house. I walked up my front stoop in my drunken haze and dug my hands in my pocket for my keys. When I grabbed the doorknob, I realized it was unlocked. My mom was here again. I quietly opened and shut the front door, locking it behind me. I put my keys on the kitchen counter and found a note written in my mom's handwriting saying, "You forgot this at our house," next to the box of half-eaten cake my parents didn't want. I didn't see my mom anywhere, so I assumed she must have gone upstairs to sleep in the guest bed until I got back, which is something she would commonly do as well. Then I heard footsteps upstairs, confirming it, and that's when I sighed once again. 27 years old, almost 3 in the morning, and she still has to wait up and treat me like a child. I ran upstairs to check the guest bed, empty along with all the bathrooms. I was afraid Mom was having one of her episodes due to her condition, so I ran to the phone to call my dad. After 4 rings, my dad picked up in a groggy voice asking what the hell is the matter. After I told him that I heard Mom wandering around upstairs in my house, there was a short pause and then he said, "That's not possible, she's sleeping right next to me." My mouth fell open as I turned my head to face the dark upstairs, and just barely by the light provided by the kitchen I could see a head peering around from the corner at the top of the stairs looking down at me. I screamed into the phone as I ran out the front door and down the street to my parents' house, explaining to my father on the way. About halfway there my dad told me, "All right, I'm going to call the cops," and hung up. I made it to my parents' house where my mom was already waiting at the door, worried sick. My mom explained that she did come over to clean my kitchen a little bit and to bring over the cake they didn't want. 2 police cars pulled up in front of my parents' house where they escorted me and my dad down the street to my house. 1 officer stayed outside with us while 2 others went inside to investigate. It felt like 15 minutes before they came back outside and said it was clear they checked the crawl space, the attic, everything. There was really nothing for me to report other than the door was left unlocked and I saw the outline of a head upstairs before I ran for it. Still, I didn't feel safe sleeping in there that night, so I went back to my parents' house. Me and my dad are certain that my mom simply forgot to lock the door when she left, as her memory has been getting worse over the past few months. My dad has been stopping her from coming over alone from now on, which makes me both sad but also relieved. Some nights I still get paranoid that whoever was in my house that night never left and is still hiding in here somewhere. Music, this is one of the few unexplainable events I've experienced in my life. I was home upstairs in my room writing my paper for my history class. As far as I knew, I was home alone, but apparently I was mistaken because my mom's voice called out from downstairs yelling my name. I called back what she didn't answer, so slightly annoyed because I didn't want to be interrupted from my train of thought on my paper. I reluctantly got up to go downstairs and see what she wanted. When I got downstairs, I looked the few unexplainable events I've experienced in my life. I was home upstairs in my room writing my paper for my history class. As far as I knew, I was home alone, but apparently I was mistaken because my mom's voice called out from downstairs yelling my name. I called back what she didn't answer, so slightly annoyed because I didn't want to be interrupted from my train of thought on my paper. I reluctantly got up to go downstairs and see what she wanted. When I got downstairs, I looked getting weird each time she called my name. It sounded exactly the same, like there was zero difference in inflection. Every single time she said my name, I yelled out "Mom" again, and she once again yelled back my name. She was nowhere to be seen in the basement, but then I noticed a little crawl space closet door was open. I call it that because it's a weird closet that you have to kind of crawl into, but it takes up a large chunk of the basement. That was the only place left in the basement that my mom could be, so I said "Mom" one final time. No answer this time. I went closer to the closet door and got on my knees just to try and look in. It was pitch black inside and I was starting to get freaked out. I said, "Mom, are you messing with me?" There was no response at all, just the quiet buzzing sound from the basement light. I got back up and for some reason decided to sprint back upstairs, slamming and locking the basement door behind me. I didn't know what I had just witnessed and heard, but I went to grab the house phone and call my mom's cell number. It rang a few times until my mom picked up and I learned that she was out grocery shopping. I told her, but she didn't believe my story. Of course, she thought I was messing with her. It took half an hour of begging her to believe me that she finally went along with it, and when she and my dad were both home, we all went down to the basement together. The closet door was still open. My dad went inside, but there was no one in there. This still remains to be the most haunting, unexplainable experience of my life. Music. There was this one time I was out late, drinking with friends. It was some point in the summer of 2016. We were kind of just walking around town and then around the neighborhood when one of my friends spotted someone hiding in a bush. He pointed and said, "Look," and we all walked a little closer to get a better look. We could see what he was talking about, but just barely. It was bizarre, like someone hiding in this bush in front of this house. When we got too close, apparently this weird off-putting sound started coming from the bush, so we all screamed and left and ran away. We screamed because it was scary, but laughed because at the same time it was bizarrely funny, and there were a lot of us. So anyway, we walked back to our houses respectively, assuming whoever was in that bush was just messing with people. I fell asleep pretty easily that night, since I was drunk, but next thing I remember was waking up to the near pitch blackness of my room. I couldn't look at the clock to see what time it was because I literally couldn't move. I was in a sleep paralysis state. I looked around the room with my eyes only and started to hear a familiar noise, the noise we heard coming from that bush, and I looked straight in front of me at the foot of my bed, and what I saw was pure nightmare fuel. It was what appeared to be this floating, grotesque, horrific head of a demonic, ghost-like thing. As it got closer to me, I realized it wasn't floating. There was a body, but its body blended in with the blackness of the room. Its mouth hung open, and it just kept making the familiar noise from the bush. It got mere inches from my face before it suddenly just faded away, and I was able to let out a scream and move my body. I sat in my bed panting and heart racing. I flicked on the lamp and checked around my bed, but that demonic thing was gone. What I just experienced seemed so real, like I was awake for it. It wasn't a dream. I told my parents about it the next day, and they agreed with me that it was sleep paralysis, though they had never heard of anyone seeing freaky like that before.